rather provocatively titled, "What You Know About Universities Might Be Wrong." And the key there is might. It might be wrong. So we're going to run through a few strategic points about what we've learned in the last 6 months to 2 years, really, about universities and the complexity of university application, and really what we think is a good approach looking forward to the 21st century when many of our sons and daughters will access universities and graduate. And just before I introduce the people who will be speaking tonight, if I flick to the first slide, you can see really what our general overview is. So this is really what we're going to be discussing and touching upon broadly, those 4 bullet points. And we're doing this in the context of being slightly provocative, because we want to provoke discussion and we want to push a particular agenda, and we're hoping that you guys will come back at us in the Q&A session afterwards if you feel like you've got some strong counterclaims or points you want to make, so we can really tease out some of the feelings amongst the parent body about the whole process of university application. I know there are people here from different grade groups, and so people have got a different kind of agenda. You might be thinking 5, 10 years ahead. For some of you, it might be 2 or 3 years ahead in terms of your sons and daughters' route through university. But one of the things we wanted to do, and the main thing for being here tonight, is to share the research that we've had the privilege of looking at. And this has come from lots of articles that have been discussed with parent groups in the senior school. This has been through discussions we've had at large conferences like NatCAC recently in San Diego, where all universities and colleges from the US and Canada and the UK and Europe attend, and we were able to speak to many, many representatives from those universities in person and get really the information from them directly, as well as from other university counselors from all North American schools. And so generally speaking, this is what we are thinking about and what we're trying to share, because we recognize that really not everyone has the same information. And we want to share that in order to make sure that we're transparent about the thinking. And tonight we're going to have a number of people contributing to the discussion. We have Mr. Luke Lawson, who's down here at the front, the Director of University Counselling here at Mulgrave, who'll be familiar to many of you, but maybe lower down the school you may not be familiar with Luke. We have Ms. Joyce Tang, who's also a member of the University Counselling Department, is over there, who will be contributing as well. We have Michelle Douglas, Vice Principal in the Senior School, and then myself, Craig Davis, the Senior School Principal. And so the other thing to mention here is I'm not going to apologize for the fact that some of these slides will be very text dense. And that's been done on purpose, mainly because we have a very large screen, so we know you can read it, but also because we're going to link this presentation to Connections. And what we provided for you in the notes section, which you will also have access to, are all the links to the articles and URLs that we'll be referring to. Obviously, if we tried to put those on the slides themselves, it would be impossible for you to read, and wouldn't be very presentationally savvy either. So we would expect you, if you have an interest, or particularly if you want to look at this yourself and question some of the claims we're making, to pursue those links at your leisure. Yeah, the other thing that's worth mentioning is, and as Luke will touch upon in a moment, is some of these points as well are based upon the conversations we've had with Mulgrave alumni, and also from my perspective, conversations I've had with alumni from the previous schools that I've been involved with in Singapore and Hong Kong. So it's also getting their opinion. And I think one of the points that we're really excited about referencing tonight is that 3rd bullet point about self-actualization. And this has really largely come from conversations with alumni students saying, I wish I'd arrived at that point of knowing what my own interests were earlier. I wish I'd done a bit more research earlier to find out a really good fit university for not only my own interests, but also the type of learning that I've loved at Mulgrave. And that's been something which has been really impressed upon us in the last couple of weeks, is students taking that responsibility themselves, so that there isn't a sense of wasted time and wasted money when students go through a particular crisis, maybe in the 1st or 2nd year at university, if they're in the wrong place in the wrong course. That also obviously touches upon the last bullet point around some of the research we've been pointing towards about the student experience at university. I know from my generation, speaking for myself, my age and my context, which is obviously the UK, the notion of thinking about university prestige or rankings based upon your own experience was unheard of. The rankings that I was familiar with in the UK were based upon research and the research status of universities, and they were ranked according to the research that academics were doing. So this notion around the fact that universities should be judged and valued about the experience of learning that students themselves are having, and trying to give you some confidence that that research is really reassuring about what it means about employability and life success and happiness, is another aspect that we'll be touching upon during the presentation. Okay, so we're going to give you a charter now of 2 slides, and I'll hand you over to Luke.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Luke Lawson, Director of University Counseling, and as you may know, and probably will know, that applying to university is probably, or arguably, the biggest decision that a student will have to make in his or her young life. And I've been involved in university counseling for over 20 years, and so I've had countless meetings with parents, with students. I've met hundreds and hundreds of university representatives, and through that experience, I just want to, as part of the university counseling department, just sort of offer sort of my perspective and guidance in terms of university applications and sort of choosing the universities and researching the universities for that. And a couple of themes that stick out for me. One is that, and something that I try to emphasize more and more, particularly in this age where a lot of information is available quite readily, you don't have to go to necessarily a library anymore, is for the student to start to take on more of the ownership of researching and finding out about institutions. And I think this is a key message that I try to give out in my own presentations, and certainly when I have meetings with parents and students, is that it's really, really important that the student, your son and daughter, starts and should take responsibility and ownership for the university application process in terms of researching, getting information about universities, and once they reach grade 11 or 12, certainly wanting to be involved in the essays and then getting the applications out. I cannot emphasize that enough, that and there'll be a slide later on about helicopter parents, and this has become a very popular term or expression over the last 5 to 7 years. And what I'm finding to a certain degree is that quite often a parent or parents almost want to take over the university application process, the research process. And quite often the student is sometimes moved to the sideline. And I can tell you, I've had numerous meetings over the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years where if I have a parent or parents and the students, or the son and daughter in my office, quite often the conversation is between myself and the parent or parents, and the student is like sitting to the side as if almost wasn't there. And so what I consciously try to do is, if the parent asks questions or starts to gain in dialogue, I will actually then refer the question over to the student, because I think it's really important that the student, your son and daughter, really takes ownership of that, because it's his or her decision really in the end. They're the ones that go on to university, and it's important that they choose a university that they're going to be comfortable with. That's really the best fit, and that's a message that we've tried to get across quite frequently over the last few years, is about the best fit. Whether that best fit may be UBC or Queen's University or Memorial University or Claremont McKenna College or Stanford or University of Bristol or Exeter University, wherever it may be, the important thing is that the student has done the research, has taken the opportunity to look at what kind of programs the university offers, what kind of facilities the university offers. Is this the place for me? It's not, is it the place for my parents? Is it the place for me? because it's going to be their home for about 4 to 5 years. And so that's a message that I really want to emphasize. And I know with a fair number of alumni who come back or I've spoken to, and quite often the students who tend to, I think, sometimes be the happiest on campus in their first year, not so much because not because of the academics, but in terms of just simply the satisfaction and the fact that they're happy on the campus where they are in terms of the social setting or the residences. Quite often it's those students who actually took most of the initiative when they're in grade 12 or grade 11 or grade 10 in looking at universities. Of course, I always encourage and always would want a dialogue among the parents, the students, and myself, but I really, really like to focus on the student and what he or she would like to do for that. So that is something that I really try to encourage for that. One of the other things, of course, is when we have those discussions, whether it's just with the student, with the parent or student, of course, then is the types of universities. And this is sometimes where you have a bit of conflict. And one of the things that sometimes parents and students will look at is our rankings. And there are all sorts of rankings out there. I mean, there are literally dozens of rankings. And it's not really the way to choose a university, is to say, okay, well, here are the top, U.S. News and World Report, which, by the way, is the #1 selling individual magazine in the United States. It actually outsells now the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. So you know how big this publication is. But universities in the United States and colleges, are obsessed with those rankings, and of course that obsession then goes down to the school level. And quite often, if the discussion starts with, well, I want, my son or daughter, or if the student says, I want to go to the top ranked institutions, whatever they may be, to me that's not a very good starting point, because they're not really looking at what is perhaps the best fit for me, which institution has the best facilities for what I want to do. It may be in athletics, it's the name of the university. And I think that is not the best way to start that conversation. It's really about, well, have you done research? And I've sat down, myself and Joyce have sat down with most of the grade 10s over the last 2 weeks, and in some of those conversations, I will ask the student, it's just with the student, if they're saying, well, I'm going to go to the U.S. or whatever it may be, I say, well, what institutions are you thinking of? And quite often, the default is sort of, well, it's Stanford or it's Harvard or Yale. And I said, well, why do you want to go to those institutions? Well, because they're the top ranked universities. And I said, well, do you really know anything about those universities other than the brand or name recognition? And quite often there's silence. And so this is where I think the conversation then needs to become broader in the context, in grade 10, in grade 9, grade 8, and so on and so forth. And it's the same with Canadian universities as well. And again, sometimes the default list tends to be UBC or McGill or University of Toronto. And listen, those are great institutions. But sometimes students, and sometimes maybe parents, forget that there are many, many other wonderful, fine institutions in Canada that offer excellent programs. And again, it makes me happy. I am thrilled, for instance, with this year's graduating class, as an example, we're going to probably have our first student attend Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. We're probably going to have our first student ever attend the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton. We're going to probably have our first student attend Bishop's University. Yeah, in Quebec. And so on. And these are fine first-class institutions. And the students who are looking at those specific universities, who may go to universities, I think have done, to a certain degree, have done research and have looked at the various possibilities. And they've looked at a variety of universities, but have taken ownership of the process for that. And so that is something I really, really want to encourage as well, no matter what grade your son or daughter is in for that, in terms of researching universities. So as I said, we look at realistic ambition for that. And, it's really up to the student, to a certain degree, is where I'm going to be the happiest on campus. And really, student satisfaction, student happiness should be a much greater measurement of what would be the best university, rather than simply, if I go to this specific university because of its reputation or because of the networking possibilities. I think that's the wrong way to go. Because if you can only get ahead in the world by only going necessarily to a well-branded university like a Stanford or a Harvard, then what about the thousands and thousands and thousands of students who didn't go to those universities? Are they not as good? And I think that kind of thinking has to go. I hope you all read Gordon McIntyre's article that came out, I believe, in the Connections last week. Yale or jail? If you haven't read the article, you must read it, because I think Gordon just did a superb job of kind of crystallizing that viewpoint, that if I don't get to Yale or if I don't get to Stanford, then there's something wrong with me. And that's just simply not true. And if Yale's the place you want to go to, then that's fine. But make sure that you choose a university for the right reason, not the wrong reason. And that's what's the important message for that. So as I said, we want to, again, refine the applications. We're making students only apply to 7 universities this year, because in that way it forces the students to research. Instead of just simply applying to a plethora of institutions, just so I can just get my name out to as many, this makes the students do a little bit more research. And so the 7 or up to 7 institutions they're choosing, they've actually put some thought and care into that. And I think that's part of the reason, maybe, that we're seeing, certainly in this year's graduating class, a much wider selection of choices by the students. And I think that is very, very good for that. So yes, we have students who are going to apply to Stanford and Harvard, but we also have students who are going to go to UNB and Bishop's and Acadia as well. And I think that's really, really important for that. As I said, I've mentioned about the helicopter parenting, and what I want to say about this, and I've already said my message a little bit about it already, but it's, and I think about, again, a lot of former students who have graduated, and the ownership they took and the initiative they took to do that research, even to necessarily even fly out to a specific university and to research it and to look at it before perhaps they can make that final decision. Because that final decision could be based on finances, it could be based on location, and whatever it may be. And it's so important, because students need to be much more resilient when they're at university. And part of the problem, I think, today is that, students need to be able to cope more and be able to experience failure, experience setbacks and losses, because quite often, that's as you probably heard, that character is built often through failure and setbacks, not always necessarily success. And so how you react to difficult situations is what's going to make you a stronger person. And as students go on to university, one of the skills that they really have to have is being able to deal with setbacks and reactions. And how do I deal with a difficult roommate? How do I deal with bad cafeteria food? How do I deal with a conflict to my timetable? How do I deal with an annoying professor? How do I deal with my laundry? How do I deal with whatever? Well, those coping skills, those skills really begin in school. Being able to put those skills together so when they do go on to university, they don't have to call home every 5 minutes or every day saying, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to do that. If you remember, if you went to university 15, 20 years ago and you lived in a dorm, in a residence, how often did you call home? Once a week, Sunday night. You lined up at the phone booth in the dorm, and that was your contact at home. For the rest of the week, you learned how to deal with issues and problems. The problem a little bit today, of course, with instant communication, with cell phones and social medias, if something goes wrong, I'm having a problem with my timetable, I have a problem with my roommate, instead of learning the skills to deal with it and cope with it and find solutions, you call home. You know, get mommy or daddy to solve my problems for me. And that's a difficult thing to deal with in today's communication age. So the last point I want to make is the recommended book of the year. It's called The I-Connected Parent. And it's by Barbara Hoffer and Abigail Moore. And this book was written a couple of years ago by a professor and by, I believe it was a sociologist, who, they were kind of gentle at the beginning of the book, you know, saying, you know, it's actually about, it says, staying close to your kids in college and beyond while letting them grow up. And as I said, they're kind of gentle at the beginning of the book, you know, saying, you know, we obviously want to support, you know, have parents support their sons and daughters and so on and so forth. But as you slowly go through the book, they become much more heavy-handed and really show that quite often more and more students are not having the coping skills. It's not necessarily the academics, but the coping skills. And they go back, I think, to their school years, their high school years or junior high school years, where, you know, how much did parents allow their students to basically fall down and have to get back up on their own, and to learn to accept that, you know, there will be setbacks, and how do you react to those setbacks, and do you just scoop them up themselves? I do it at, you know, I have 2 children in the school, in the junior school, you know, and sometimes I always want to come to their rescue every time something happens, and it's difficult as a parent to sometimes let students you know, suffer, or either rejection or whatever it may be for that. So I think I want to end there because I don't want to go on too much longer. But anyway, so those are just sort of the ideas and talking points ahead with respect to the charter, I guess, or perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. That's that last point obviously is a theme that runs through the presentation about grit and resilience, which obviously many of you might be familiar with. It's a hot topic in education, and we know the research is really robust about saying if schools can develop that grit and resilience in young people, it's the biggest indicator of happiness and success, employability later in life. And of course, the university process is no different. And the comments we're making here shouldn't be understood as, oh, this means that university counselling at schools just takes a back seat and we let kids just get on with it. Of course not. We are supporting students in the same way as we've always supported students, but we've got to tread that fine line between coming up with structured and staged support that helps students reach that independence. But it's important that the community understands that the process of university counselling is absolutely no different to the process of education in other areas of the school. So some of you may have seen as you came in this evening the approaches to learning IB skills agenda for the 21st century, where self-management is the key skill for this development, and self-management is also the key skill in the university application process. You know, but we will find more refined and more nuanced ways as counsellors and as the school to support students in that process, to give them the structured, opportunities to develop that independence. And this is also part of the research that's going on out there in the world. I mean, this was a very popular TED Talk from a number of years ago by a man called Shaw Acker, who himself is a Harvard graduate, and he worked in the dorms at Harvard for 5 or 6 years after he graduated, and it led him into his own research into the notion of grit and resilience. And the point he makes very eloquently and very funnily in the TED Talk, we'll listen to just a couple of minutes of it in a moment, is the fact that he saw so many depressed students at Harvard because obviously they were focused on the externalities. They'd worked, they'd been over-supported, over-tutored, over-parented, over-schooled to get themselves to this holy grail of Harvard, and they arrived, they were exhausted. It may not have been a good fit. And like we're saying, we're not trying to say that these universities aren't a good fit. They're a fantastic university for the right kind of people. But they would arrive and they wouldn't have a particularly good experience because it wasn't right for them. And therefore he's saying that really the research shows that it's what you do at university, it's how you behave at university that's the biggest indicator of success. And the way I like to think of it is, I mentioned earlier that in my generation in the UK, the rankings were based upon research and reputation that didn't actually equate to student experience. But often as parents, we are seduced by them because what we want for our kids is success. We think if they get to a particular university, they're there. The main concern is they're going to network with like-minded, brilliant individuals, and that's going to be the guarantee of their future success. And this is where we're saying that the networking piece is equally important in the context of our discussion tonight, because it's no longer the case that just by being at a particular institution that magically that you're then networking with brilliant people who will secure your success and employability later. Actually, they're finding that students with the right mindset, the right grit, the right resilience, when they're at universities like state universities in the US, or second or third string universities, whatever that means in Canada and the UK, that they're actually more successful than their counterparts in the Ivy Leagues or in the Russell Group in the UK, because they're actually applying their skills more effectively and actually getting the most out of their experience. Let's have a listen to what Shaw says.
See, what we're finding is it's not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. And if we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. When I applied, I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later that allowed me to go, suddenly something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to, wasn't that guy. But what happened, I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years, and what I found in my research and my teaching is that these students, no matter how happy they were with their original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brain was focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up, I know some of you have heard of it, when they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something out of Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness. Because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels. When in reality, if I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality. What we found is that only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat.
Okay, so you can see the link there because obviously that's part of the agenda of trying to build the autonomy and independence of students as they're going through that process and making sure it's the right fit. Getting back to what Luke was saying about our rankings and reputation, this is also informed by this list, which is what, in discussion with many of the universities and the representatives of universities I met in San Diego, is emerging as an alternative methodology for ranking, that we should be looking at student satisfaction and student engagement surveys. And we've linked for you in the notes section a massively comprehensive survey on this done by the US National Survey, and you can see that the rankings that produces is very different to the traditional rankings and reputations that we might be familiar with. So that is something which is a strong indicator for employability, value for money, return on investment, and happiness for graduates. That's the second point there as well. This also links to the length at university, which many of us will be very focused on, because obviously the longer that an undergraduate is there, the more it costs. And when an undergraduate program stretches from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 years, not only is it more draining on the family's finances, but also the research shows that those people are less likely to find happiness and job satisfaction quickly. Again, this is the process of self-actualization we mentioned earlier. If that can happen earlier at school, that the recognition about where they want to go and the kind of passions they have are realized because they're in charge, then it will save everyone money and time and stress later. That also is part of the grit and resilience issues I mentioned earlier. And a lot of this you can find in the fantastic book, Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be by Frank Bruni. This has informed many of the articles that we've pushed around to different parent groups and discussions through school as well. So alternatively then, what do we mean by appropriate and successful? And how do we look into this as a school, as families, as members of the community? So look at those universities that disclose student engagement criteria. That's a really good starting point for students and families to look at that. Universities that are doing this are obviously, conscious of the learning that they're modeling and conscious of student satisfaction. And this, of course, applies to the traditional universities, the Ivy Leagues as well. It's not that this is something just for newer, more innovative, lesser-known universities. Look at the average duration of graduation. If it's around about 4.5 years in North America, that's a very good return on investment, a very good indication of success at university. When students start to look into this, they need to cast their net really, really wide. So we were saying earlier that we want to refine the process, we want people to be targeted, but in the starting point, people need to be looking at all universities, not to start with what they know, not to start, as Mr. Lawson was talking about, with the big three in Canada or the Ivy Leagues, but look at every single program and every single university, and to see what universities are best for a particular program. There was a lovely article we were looking at earlier in the year, which from the US, that was talking about how for engineering and computer science, Waterloo here in Canada is outperforming any university in the US in terms of Silicon Valley employment. And that wasn't very well known either in Canada or in the US. And that's an example of where people are doing research in a really refined way. In the UK, if you're an English literature student and you want to go to the best English literature college, it's going to be Sussex University, not Oxford or Cambridge or Durham or Bristol or Exeter. Again, it's specific to the program. So that's a really good sign that people are looking at things the right way. Look at employer surveys about what skills and which undergraduate programs deliver for future adaptable, flexible job markets. Some of you may be familiar with the notion of liberal arts colleges, or what are liberal arts and science colleges like Quest University around the corner in Squamish. Increasingly, employers are favoring students from those contexts because obviously they're developing adaptable skills in critical thinking, engagement, project-based learning, design thinking. And employers are very aware of the fact they want students with those skills. They're less concerned, as you'll see in the research, with the name of the university. What is an interesting mismatch is that when they polled North American adults about what they thought of rankings and how important rankings were to the future successes of their sons and daughters, it came about 85%. But when they polled employers, it came in at under 40%. So there's a discrepancy between what we think and what employers think. So if the idea of a status university is to try and secure success and happiness for your kids, then we need to be aware that employers think very differently than we do. And they're looking really at the skill set. They're not looking at the name of the university. And that's, sorry for the dense text, but I thought it would be useful for you to have some key quotes. In the great article that was around 6 months ago called The Elite Squeeze, there's some depressing news, but there's also some very positive news, which is that if you do, in my view, unwisely just focus on the traditional reputational universities only, then obviously the competition is increased and increased and increased globally over the past 10 years, making it harder and harder, especially for international students, to access those highly competitive universities in the US. And however, if you broaden that scope and the research is focused very much on the program and what's best for the university, then we're seeing some really good positive indicators of success and happiness in those institutions. Please do not fetishize the idea of exclusivity, Frank Bruni says. Of course, knowing that, what does that exclusivity mean? And if you think it's not just about the status of the university, but who you will meet, the networking piece, then a reminder again that networking is not based on institution, but based upon individual effort. So that individual takes that resilience with them. Wherever they go, they're going to be successful. And that's really quite reassuring. So the effort a student puts into his or her time there includes taking advantage of opportunities such as internships, study abroad programs, getting to know the right faculty members. A motivated student can get a great education at a supposedly so-so school. An unmotivated student can get a so-so education even at a highly selective one. So again, a little caveat and health warning here. We're not saying don't apply to the Ivy Leagues or the top 3 universities in Canada or the reputational universities anywhere on the planet, and we will be totally supportive of those applications and do everything we can to support each individual student in that endeavor, but make sure it's the right pick and it's the right choice for you and your family.
Could I just...
Yes.
I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the universities that do come to Mulgrave, because we had over 60 universities come through our doors this fall. The university season is over now for visits. And, you know, even as a counselor, I always learn something new every time when we have universities come. And again, this is why I want to stress the importance of doing the research, of being able to kind of cast the net wide. So, for instance, we had 2 of the Claremont colleges here this year, Panoma College and Claremont McKenna. And I did not know, for instance, at Claremont McKenna College, which is just east of Los Angeles, that they offer a PPE, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics program, very much modeled off the Oxford model. And you know, that's not necessarily known to a lot of students, and but is often quite attractive to a lot of students, are programs like that. St. Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia, for instance, has a very, very good international relations department through the Coady Institute. And again, you know, because a lot of students are interested in international relations. But again, you know, going to those presentations and looking at what is available for those students, I think is so key in terms of making a wise decision or a wise choice. Even my own alma mater, where I did my undergraduate work, the University of Prince Edward Island. How many of you have been to University of Prince Edward Island? None of you. It's a great, great university. They opened this year the only sustainable engineering department in Canada. It's a $25 million complex where the university is dedicated to being innovative in specific fields. So instead of simply just copying what other universities are doing, but actually want to innovate and be selective. And so really it has become the leader in what has become a very highly sought after profession in terms of dealing with the environment and sustainability through engineering for that. And so, you know, quite often a lot of these universities do sometimes tend to be forgotten because we sometimes only just think of perhaps those 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 universities. Let me emphasize yet again, there are so many really, really good universities out there that students should consider. And what was, again, I was happy about, for instance, was Carleton University was here a few weeks ago. And most years, I'd be lucky if I got 3 or 4 students to attend the Carleton University event. But this year we had about 12 students go to it. And because usually, you know, quite often the first reaction is Carleton, ooh, Ottawa, oh, it's cold, you know, but I, you know, and it's nice, I think, to see students are sort of moving beyond that and looking at what it has to offer. And of course, Carleton University has a very good architecture program, and of course it has a very, very good journalism program, to name but 2. And the students who went to that presentation, you know, came out of it going, wow, I didn't know Carleton offered this or it offered that, and I was really, really interested in that university. And so, I think it's those kind of discussion points that need to be broadened and expanded. And you know, I would love to see 10 or 12 or 15 students attend those presentations. If Wilfrid Laurier University was here, for instance, where I only had 2 students show up. rather than to simply have the large numbers go to a few of the presentations. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for students and for parents, who, by the way, are always invited to the presentations to hear the different types. For instance, Whitman College in Washington State has one of the best geology programs. If you want to go into geology and study earth sciences, Whitman College is second to none in terms of their program. And I think Mr. Davis was putting up some of the suggested universities that we had that we would encourage students to look at. I mean, there are many, many others as well for that. I mean, that's just a small list. But as I said, I think it's always my favorite expression: casting the net wide and looking at other institutions. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just conscious of time. I want to just run through the last few slides quickly so we can open it up to discussion, because it's going to be, otherwise 45 minutes is a bit long for you guys to listen to us. So just quickly then, we've touched upon this in detail. There's a link to the ATL agenda that we have in school, which is a link to obviously what we're doing with university support and counselling. I've mentioned this phrase self-actualization, as well as obviously thinking about a broader understanding of what are good universities for the right student at the right time. It's also thinking about the right kind of subject. This may not be an issue anymore, and hopefully it isn't, but I'm obviously generalizing from my own experience when, back in the 1980s, the idea of going to study something that didn't have a clear vocational link was balked at by parents. I'm not paying for you to go and study art or literature. What job will you get? I mean, hopefully now that we've moved on beyond that, but this is also part of that notion of finding your passion and making the passion your job and your career, and that seems to work. And one of the things that we've had time to do is to provide you with the research to give you the confidence about this. So the confidence about the fact that happiness and student engagement leads to the kind of job and successes in life that you might have thought before only comes by going to Harvard. So that's really where we're trying to bridge the gap, because if you guys have the confidence, and we all have the confidence, that a successful university career in any place is going to lead to the kind of job security and success in life that we all want for our kids, then we can all relax a little bit. So that's the most important element here. So I like this particular graphic, that if you look at one side, obviously, and don't look at the other, then you come up with a different conclusion. I think the other point that we wanted to touch upon at the start about realistic ambition, we have to walk that tightrope in schools in supporting students with being ambitious. So having an aspirational choice or two about university, knowing that it might be very, very competitive, and we're completely open to that, and we want to support ambition. But we also want to be realistic. So that's where the notion of, very infrequently at Mulgrave, but we do get them maybe 4 or 5 or 6 students every year who think the best way of applying to university is to apply to 40 or 20, thinking that if they scattergun their application, something will hit. And of course, they don't fully realize the huge pressure that puts the student under as they're pursuing their IB diploma studies in grade 11 and 12. And it's not a strategically wise approach. We're actually guiding students now to say that you should have, a maximum of 7 US applications in total. We want to try and really rein in that approach to try and make sure that by that stage, obviously by the end of grade 11, beginning of grade 12, they should have whittled down the wide casting of the net down to some really refined university choices for them. The other thing that we've put in the notes section on this slide is obviously the increasing data about, for those particular Ivy Leagues, how difficult it is. And I say this, cautiously, and it's not to say that we're discouraging people for an ambitious run at the top universities, but we all need to know about the data. If you're an international student, it's been widely published that you've got about a 1% chance of entry into the US Ivy Leagues because of the increasing volume of applications globally, and the undergraduate student population at these universities hasn't increased in 15 years, but the application's gone up exponentially. So you also have the huge increase in SAT and ACT score requirements. So all schools, especially independent schools like Mulgrave, we are doing everything we can to support students in their ACT and SAT prep. We do everything we can on that front, and we make sure that students are fully supported and they're given a really good run at this. But it's also wise for us to share with the community the chances of success, and you're aware of that. And so therefore, you can then think about the strain that puts on an individual, the strain that puts on a student and a family, if you're not fully aware of the likelihood of success. Like I say, it's a tightrope, and we'll deal with every case individually. And we will have a lot more confidence in a student where we know they've done the research and said, I really want to go to the NYU Business School because, I really want to go to Yale to study psychology because, and that's something they think that they're after. Absolutely brilliant. And we'll support them, and we'll do like any other good school will in making sure that they have every chance of success. That's why the third point there as well about sticking to the plan and not being influenced by peers, rumours or external influences. That's what Mr. Lawson, Luke, was talking about earlier when he sometimes feels a sense of frustration when all the grade 11s or grade 10s flock to a particular university presentation by McGill, and then another university gets one or two people showing up. Again, because obviously teenagers are influenced by their own perceptions. So we want to start this discussion with families so that we can distribute a wider sense of what's a good university. The last point there, I won't talk to it tonight, but I put some slides for you at the end so you can look at this yourself, is all of the articles that have come out in Time magazine and Fortune about liberal arts colleges, and the number of CEOs that have come from a liberal arts background, and the number of leaders of industry who are really, really receptive to people with that interdisciplinary background. And someone said to me when I was in San Diego, it's worth mentioning that some parents believe that because liberal arts colleges are called colleges, they're not the same status as universities. Please be clear that they are universities, and they're highly selective and highly competitive. So the fact they're called a college shouldn't make any difference to your perception of them as universities. But there's a huge amount of data here that is reassuring about that. And of course, it's a fantastic fit for IB diploma students here at Mulgrave, because it's the same kind of education around maintaining 6 subjects, maintaining critical thinking, maintaining project-based approaches, and that's why increasingly in the versatile landscape of employment where your sons and daughters will be doing 6, 7, 8, 9 different jobs, at least according to the research, having that adaptability is key, which is why these particular universities are becoming popular. So take a look through that at your leisure and read those articles which I've linked underneath. And we've put a couple of examples here of both a traditional university and a newer university that are modelling this. So you take Bristol University in the UK. For those of you who might know anything about the UK, Bristol has always traditionally been as close as you can get to Oxford and Cambridge as possible. Bristol, along with Durham and Warwick, are the universities that students who apply to Oxford and Cambridge often go to. And Bristol itself is a very traditional academic institution, and they recently did a presentation to us in the Best of UK team presentation in Vancouver, and they've completely redesigned that undergraduate program. Now for me, this is a real sign of a significant shift. If Bristol are doing this, then this is going to be happening across the globe, I think, in all universities. So they're saying, right, we need to maintain people's interest in subject specialism, but we also need to increase interdisciplinarity, entrepreneurship, design, creativity, and project-based learning. So what they're providing is a 4-year master's degree that you get after completing 3 years as an undergraduate. So you can see here that the approach is that as well as doing their specific study, they're doing design and transdisciplinary thinking. They're buddied up with a vocational work placement for the whole of their 3 years. And then in the 4th year, it's all transdisciplinary. So they end up with a master's degree after 4 years. So it's good bang for your buck as well. It's very savvy business model by Bristol as well. And of course, we had a presentation last week from Quest, the new liberal arts and sciences colleges. Well, when you say new, it's 15 years old, around the corner in Squamish. That's a phenomenal program. I was massively impressed. It's really worth having a look at, and it's really worth having a look at some of their reports on student satisfaction and looking at their alumni reports about employability as well, because what they're doing, again, is very, very similar to the kind of IB education we offer here at Mulgraves. It's a very good fit. But that's just 2 examples, and as Luke was saying, we've just highlighted Some colleges, this is not a definitive list, of course. This is our attempt at being provocative by saying, are you aware of these universities? We think they're fantastic for particular reasons, and trying to push that agenda of opening up people's understanding of what is an excellent university.
Just a slight correction. Quest has
Yes.
only been open for 8 years.
8 years, okay, sorry. My mistake. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to you guys for questions. And anything, please, come at us with different viewpoints, anything you want more information on. You know, we've got about 40 minutes to do that, and we'll get the microphones to you. If you're not comfortable using a mic, you want to ask the question, I'll just repeat it to everyone so everyone can hear.
I have a comment rather than a question. I work for a company that provides mindfulness consulting to corporations and academic institutions. We're working with UBC and other universities, including Memorial, which somebody mentioned earlier. And the universities are now actively seeking support for their first-year university students in managing the stress of being in first year, and they're typically not coping very well, and they're attributing that quite often to the fact that they are over-reliant on their parents, and that's causing first years to really find their first months and over the whole year more challenging than they have in the past.
Thank you for that. Who's next?
The list we had up here, you mean?
Yeah, the question was what kind of grades are required, IB diploma grades, for some of those Canadian universities that were on the list earlier?
I mean, there's no specific magic grade per se that I can say for all universities, but in terms of IB diploma scores, again, depending on the program, I mean, it's not. I can't just sort of give it like one number and say this is what you need, but for those universities that we listed there, for most of the programs, if you had between about 24, 26 to about 30 points in the IB, that should be sufficient for entry. I mean, that's a very general statement, obviously. Yeah, go ahead, yeah. Well, in the grade 11 class, we have a post-secondary planning block every 2 weeks as part of the TOK class. Well, it's one-on-one and with the whole group. So for instance, what I have done in the grade 11 block this year is we talk about, for instance, different faculties. For instance, like I actually photocopied SFU's colorful diagram of the different faculties, so like Faculty of Arts, Science, and then all like the majors. And so we, so I can't go through every single one, but we talk about like what kind of disciplines are offered under schools or faculties, and sort of the structure of a university. And again, every university is different for that. And so, but we try to, kind of generalize. What it, perhaps, or ask the students, what specific programs are you interested in, or let's talk about that, or even go to the guidebook. The other thing is, as I said before, is the university reps who come give a great discussion sometimes on specific faculties or programs of interest. And quite often, if it's a good presentation, the person will say, well, who's interested in music or who's interested in maybe going into the sciences or whatever, and then we'll tailor the presentation to that, and we'll actually talk about, specific subjects, what careers that students may be able to go into. The other thing is, on many of the university websites, is that if you actually go to a specific department, whether it's a faculty of arts or even to the sociology department or psychology department, they'll have their own web page, and quite often on there they will actually have types of jobs that graduates have gone into, or what kind of jobs may be appropriate to that specific area of study in university for that. So, I try to do that a little bit with a one-on-one with the grade 10s, but obviously, there's a time factor there. We just don't have that contact, but it, certainly there's a lot of available resources out there for the students to do that. So, and we also talked about structure, like what a major is, what a minor is, what's an honors program. Because even terminology like that, co-op program, exchange programs, even sort of basic vocabulary, sometimes some students may not know what any of that means. So it's just to prep them for it.
Hi. I have a question. We have only experience in the States,
Yeah.
with our older son who's in university now,
Yeah.
overseas, with the AP program,
Yeah.
and how intensely competitive it is in the States to stack up those APs. And so the IB program, we have a son here now who's in grade 8, so this is a new program for us. And so I know that overseas they favor IB and they really understand that program. And I just want to know now what do we do when we don't have the APs for the U.S. applications?
So did everybody hear the question? Or yeah. So we've been offering the IB now, the diploma program, for 7-8 years now, and I've been involved in the IB for over 20 years. So even in my previous school, I have not had. I'll tell you. Let me put this in a basic way here. When we send information to American universities, when we send an application off to a U.S. university, my contact information or Joyce's contact information is on there. So if they have any questions about the application, about the program that we offer, in this case, the IB program, they can pick up the phone and call. In the 20 years I've been dealing with U.S. applications, I have never had a single American university call me and say, "What is this IB?" Oh no. So what I'm saying is that they understand it and they understand the rigors of the program, and because one of the factors in applying to many American universities, and I'm not talking just simply about the most competitive, but a lot of, good universities in the United States, one of the factors they look at is the rigor of the program that a student is taking out of school. And so if you identify yourself as an IB school, then that's kind of like a sort of an added weighting on their application. Now, there are other factors they're going to look at other than just simply the academic. I mean, if it was just academics and all we need to do was just send a transcript, forget the rest. Obviously, they're going to look at other factors as well. But, considering the number of students, I mean, we have a relatively small graduating class every year, about 60 to 70 students. And if you look at the number of students who apply to the university, which is about to U.S. universities, which is about 15 to 20% of our grad class, ballpark, and the universities they get into, the wide variety of universities, I think the IB is certainly well known by the admissions office. And the other thing is that when the representatives, when you do apply from outside of Canada to the United States, often you apply as an international student to most of the universities in the United States. And you have to understand that a significant number of international students who apply to American universities come from IB schools. And so they don't go into the domestic pile, per se. They go into the international pile. And they're read by international admissions officers. And it's those same admissions officers that come to the school. So for instance, when Claremont McKenna College was here, or when Whitman was here, I often ask the person, I say, "Do you read the applications?" that come from the school? Yes, we do.
They're the ones.
You know, and so I always say to students, look, you know, if you're really interested about going to Whitman or Panoma or University of Southern California, which is very popular with our students, or wherever it may be in the States, that quite often the person who comes is the person who's going to read that application, you know, and would make more sense to go and introduce them. So, oh, listen, I have said that many times.
We're like
to
broken
students.
records. I swear, I've repeated it so many times, and I think between Luke and myself, we've lost count of how many millions of times we've repeated it to the numerous grades over the years. I swear they ignore my emails because we email them the day of and the day before and the week before about when universities are coming. And then I ask the kids, oh, do you know so-and-so's coming? They're like, no. And I'm like, did you ignore my email again? And it's kind of one of those things where we kind of have to train them to read our emails.
I was shocked. I thought that there was so much animosity in this process, especially in the States, state universities and all that. When it boiled down to it, I was shocked at how personal that experience was and how they knew and read everything.
Yeah, that was a learning curve for me. I've taken on my own learning objective for the year is to get more intricately intimate with US universities in particular, because I've worked in IB diploma schools worldwide, but obviously the volume of traffic to the US relative to the cohort size here is greater. And when I was in San Diego and I spoke to the reps from the University of California colleges, so Berkeley, San Diego, UC Santa Cruz, Davis, Irvine, and they were all together and they did a fantastic presentation. I spoke to them afterwards, and I'll go further than Luke. They were very clear to me in saying they knew the IB diploma was the best pre-university curriculum. There was no question of that. And I mentioned the AP. And many US universities are aware of that. Obviously, they will never say that on record. They'll never put it in writing, the same as they don't in the UK. The Times Educational Supplement did a wonderful blind survey of UK university admissions and saying, which program do you think is the best one for preparing for university? Which do you value as being the best? And they came back 78% IB diploma. Compared to the British A-levels, which is similar to the AP, standalone subjects at an advanced level. So I know that in the US it's well known. And California are really transparent. They say they have a 14-point process, 14 touch points for the application. SAT, ACT, of course, the IB diploma is weighted very heavily, but all the other elements, the essay, the personal statement, references, etc., etc. But in terms of the confidence, they said, okay, Mulgrave, they all knew Mulgrave. And I was surprised. We're a small school in Canada. I didn't expect the University of California, with the volume of applications they get from all over the world, to know Mulgrave. Oh, we know Mulgrave, we know Mulgrave. Yeah, so I'm not overstating Mulgrave, and I'm not trying to say that we're phenomenal, but I know from that, I was surprised like you, given the volume, they do take the time, and they really, really love the IB diploma. And frustratingly, they were saying, yes, we would like to give IB diploma students a pass, where they didn't have to do an SAT or an ACT. And I was saying, please. Because obviously that's a concern, because those aren't particularly, in my view, SAT, ACT, the testing itself isn't particularly progressive in terms of what they're testing, but they have to jump through that hoop nevertheless.
Craig, I think there had been an article that we shared recently where a lot of the university professors and maybe even teacher associates had given the final to a group of AP students who had been excused from taking a certain course, say psychology or English or certain math courses, and they failed it, which just proved again that they had been excused from taking a course that they really hadn't been prepared to skip. And so more and more universities aren't really accepting AP credit as credit anymore. And in fact, I think you had mentioned that universities like NYU aren't requiring SATs anymore?
No, they don't. We wish there were more like NYU, but if you're an IB diploma student, you don't have to sit the SAT, ACT.
IB employ people to actually work with the universities for the whole of North America. So they actually go around universities and advocate for the IB program to make sure they appreciate the level that is done. And they also work with a lot of universities to do research projects. So they look at the nutrition, they look at the grades that the students get and their employability afterwards. Quite a lot of those articles are available on the IB website for you to see, and I think we have
Yeah, and you have to remember, I mean, you can just go back into Canadian universities, you've got to remember from the university perspective, I mean, this is a business, right? They need to fill seats. And it's not just about filling seats, but it's about, as we said in a previous slide, about students being able to stay in university and complete it, their degree in 4 years or maybe 5 years. And now that enough IB students have gone through schools for the last 30 or 40 years, universities are using longitudinal studies and find that IB students will graduate in 4 years or 5 years, that the attrition or dropout rate is much, 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 much lower for IB students. And because of that, a lot of universities, seek out IB students. I mean, UBC does that. They very much, in fact, UBC receives more IB transcripts from the IB organization than any other university in the world. And so I mean, UBC obviously sees the value and the importance of the IB program, knowing that those students are going to stay in university and most likely will not drop out, at least certainly not for academic reasons. And the other thing is we're starting to get presenters that come to the school who have actually are former IB students themselves. The representatives that comes from Mount Allison University in the Maritimes, which by the way is another fantastic university.
Plugs.
I'm not biased against the Maritime, well, my brother went there as well, another fantastic university, Mount Allison University. The presenter who comes, who's been coming for the last couple of years, is a former IB student. And so I mean, and if the person who comes is not a former IB student, they often know or are associated with IB students or former IB students in the admissions office. So, when I started this over 20 years ago, the IB was not so clear in a lot of the universities, and I often had to prep the presenter coming, saying, "Can you talk about the IB, or do you know about the IB?" I don't have that problem anymore. It's never an issue from any of the universities that come to visit the school for that. So,
Is there another question?
In terms of the students taking ownership of their research for the universities, is there a way that you can incorporate into the contact time that they have with you, that you make an expectation in a way for them to have researched something or a faculty or whatever, so when they meet with you, they can have concrete questions to ask, maybe clearer visions of what they think they might want to do, and if we could also incorporate, going back to Tori's question, if during that time they research before they have that contact time with you, that they research what is anthropology or what is whatever else they may be interested in, so that this task of researching on their own is not just done in a hurry over a short period of time when they're so stressed about the IB. So incorporating it somehow, to me, makes a lot of sense.
If I take that first, it's a good question, because I think that's why we were saying earlier that with the notion of trying to build student autonomy, there's also the fact that we can tweak and revise our support services to help students get there. We know that this happens in life and learning in the middle school in terms of the first stages in which Joyce and Luke go into those life and learning sessions and start the process of thinking about career, which is the first step for students to think about which university, which kind of career would you be attracted to when you're 12, 13, 14. That's the first step. With a little bit of self-analysis about the kind of strengths and weaknesses and passions that you have, that's the first stage. What we're trying to do is is like other schools, this is what I bring a bit of perspective from other contexts, is whether we can now move to pulling students out of academic lessons, which we're prepared to do, to increase the amount of time that students get for the kind of discussions you're talking about. Because at the moment, Luke and Joyce are working in a situation where they're trying to get students to minimize the impact on academics, trying to do that within a working day. So my job as an administrator is to think about what can we do with the timetable to create more opportunities for even longer conversations. And one of the things that I'm conscious of, and it's the same in Singapore and Hong Kong where I came from, where many families do engage the services of external university tutoring services. And that's always going to be the case. And we're not saying that shouldn't be the case, but obviously what we want to try and do is to maximize the amount of guidance we can give, as long as we don't become the helicopter parents ourselves and make students overly reliant on us, so they don't do the basics like showing up to presentations and doing the basic kind of research on university websites. We've got to make sure that they understand that it's their life and they need to do the work, but we can guide. One of the things we're looking into next year is we're currently examining whether we can schedule into grade 10, 11 and 12 what we call a life skills block, which would emulate a life and learning, which is where we can do a lot more of this kind of broadband work around, defining what anthropology and sociology might be, looking at some of the big messaging that we can take on with an entire grade group, as well as to complement the one-to-ones. And then we're also looking at whether we can come up with a program where we can pull students out for longer sessions if we can get additional staffing for the counselling team. And that's also the other thing that we're looking into. So it's a good question, and I think it's right to ask that, because I think we can look to do more, as long as we all understand the more isn't spoon-feeding it to the students. We've got to be really, really clear about what we're doing, that it's supporting but not creating an over-reliance. Otherwise we're back to square one. That's the other thing I'd like to say, before more people drift away, is that just do be careful about the use of external tutors, because they can give very different messages than the ones that we're giving. And they can give messages that are based upon their own business model. So read between the lines there. To be careful about what those tutors are saying, and be careful that the messages they're providing are consistent with what we're saying, because we don't want you guys to go away confused, because obviously a business model is dependent upon people returning and returning and returning. And one of the things I will say, I don't mind saying, is that the reason why I shared that statistic about, for Ivy Leagues, there being a less than 1% chance for international students, which includes Canadian students, is not something that many external tutors like to hear, because they obviously might promise, well, if you start your counselling service with us from the age of 8 onwards, we'll build up a portfolio, it will be so fantastic, we'll guarantee success into Harvard. Just be very cautious about that, because it's the odds are there for everyone to see, and of course those people can provide a great service to complement what we're doing, but make sure they're not promising undeliverables.
Just another comment. With external tutors is interesting, because I always get a lot of questions and presentations about, do universities understand the IB program? And yes, they do, but actually what I have found quite often is when students do have an external consultant, it's quite often that external consultant doesn't have a very good knowledge of the IB program. And so sometimes that student does get mixed messages or unclear messages about the the nuances of the curriculum, or about university admissions with respect to the IB program, or the types of courses. And so often that's where sometimes often the student becomes a little bit confused because of that. It's really more with an external consultant than it ever is with the university in terms of the IB program.
Yes, the whole. Oh, I'm sorry.
So the whole of the
All of these
presentation-
slides, yeah, and
The whole of the presentation will be available on Connections this Friday, which will include all the links, all the notes that we've put into the notes section of the presentation that you can't visibly see right now. So all of that will be available as of Friday Connections.
yeah. I was hoping for some violent disagreement. Well, guys, it looks like we're done. Thank you so much for coming out. I know it's a big ask to come out late, and it's cold and it's wet, but please take a closer look at this. And if you do have any questions, feel free to contact us in the Senior School for any follow-up. Thank you for coming.